We built this little boat in just 10 days, starting out from a pile of wood on day one and finishing up with a fully painted and varnished boat that we could launch on the final day. This little project started out as a brief to create a 2-week course that would illustrate a whole range of boat building techniques. So I've done this to include CNC cutting, epoxy bonding, jig building, epoxy coating, clamp building, steam bending, hand tool work, plywood boat construction using modern techniques, a whole host of epoxy application methods. We learned to create hand-cut scarf joints, lamination of wood and composites, including combinations of wood and carbon fibre. We did some epoxy filleting, hand tool work and solid woodworking. We did fiberglassing, filling, fairing, sanding, priming, painting, oiling and varnishing using modern fast systems. And we used a whole host of techniques for installing hardware. Then on the final day, we launched our little boat. So, how did all of this come about then? Well, I was invited by the Boatbuilding Academy to create a course down there that I was able to teach. I'm incredibly grateful to them for asking me to come down there and teach a course. If you don't know about it already, the Boatbuilding Academy is based in Lyme Regis on the south coast of the UK. And it's an incredible little place to be able to learn boat building. It's a really great environment to work in. Based right on the seafront, so you're in a picturesque setting, but the general atmosphere of the whole place down there is a really chilled, relaxed and great friendly vibe. You've got all sorts of things going on in the workshop with long course students building their boats downstairs, and you've got short courses going on upstairs. There's a great buzz and a feel about the place, and I generally really enjoyed being down there for 2 weeks to teach the course. So when I got the invitation to create a course down there, I jumped at the chance and said, yes, absolutely, let's do it. So pretty much all we started out with for this course was a time scale. We wanted to make sure that this was a 2-week course, and within that time frame we would build a boat from start to finish that would include a whole host of things. So I had to make the boat fit that bill. I started out, as we say, on the drawing board, so I was going to actually draw up a boat that we were going to build on this course. And first of all, I went to some of my old boat building books and had a look through for some fairly simple boats that would fit the bill for this and that we could build in a short time frame. Now, I'm all about modernising boat plans, so I lofted a handful of different boat designs in CAD to see how these would work construction-wise and how we would make it so that we could build the boats very quickly. I lofted a handful of different skiff designs, most of these from William Atkin, who's a really great designer and did loads of little skiffs like this for the motorboat and yachting books, various different books and publications many years ago. So I finally arrived on a design called Jebb. This one kind of fitted the bill. It was small enough that it was going to be quite manageable to build. And because it had a flat bottom, it lent itself very well to the way in which I envisaged that we would build this boat. So what I did was I scanned the original plans. These then get calibrated for size and they go into CAD so that I'm able to draw the lines over the top of the boat and then loft it in a 3D CAD package. This allows me to fair the plans out and correct any errors that may have been in the original lines. And once I'd done that, I ended up with a set of hull skins. From there, I pretty much redesigned all the construction method for this boat. This was originally a traditional wood skiff, but I wanted this to be a plywood construction that would go together very quickly. So I re-engineered the entire internal construction of this boat, the specification of all the planking, the framing and everything so that it would locate and fit together very quickly. From here on, with CAD design, this naturally leads very well into the CNC cutting process. So all of the parts of this boat, certainly for the primary structure, are CNC cut. This includes a beveling process to pre-bevel all of the framing, the stem on the boat, the transom, and all of the planking is also pre-shaped. That includes both a CNC type version of a scarf joint which locks together with stepped layers throughout each component, but it also involves pre-cutting the gerralds. This is a joint at the end of the planks, both at the forward end of the boat by the stem, but also in the aft end at the transom, that allows the planks to transition from a full overlap, which they are in the middle of the boat, to a flush fitting face, which they are at either end. This is basically a long tapered rebate joint that goes from nothing to half of the plank thickness over a course of the end of the plank. So I cut all the parts for the boat and then I took it down to the Boat Building Academy for the course. So let's start with day one and see how we build this little boat. So we start out on day one with a fairly relaxed beginning to the course. I did some epoxy demos with the students just to show them the process of mixing and thickening epoxy for all the various different processes that we were going to need to use throughout the course. Then our main goal for day one was to get our CNC cut scarf joints glued up, which is all the joints for the side planking and bottom planking. This involves utilising a two-step bonding process where we wet out the plywood with an unthickened epoxy first and then assemble the joint with a thickened epoxy. We also then started preparing some of the elements for pre-coating, which we'll be doing on the second day, which involves just cleaning up any of the faces and rounding any exposed edges that would be on show within the finished boat. So then on to day two, and this was all about epoxy coating all of our components on the internal faces. This is a very important process, particularly for reducing the time frame of the build. The drying times of things alone was very much a driving force for getting this done in 10 days. And by epoxy coating, that allows us to seal the wood grain on all internal faces of the boat. It allows us to fill that wood grain ready for the finish that's going to come afterwards. It's going to make sure that all of that plywood is nicely sealed, and it's also going to allow us to do multiple coats in a day. So we did 3 coats of West System 105-207 epoxy here, all applied in the same day, wet on wet, and that allowed us to get things pre-coated very quickly and ready for the finishing process that would come towards the end of the second week. In the downtime between waiting for coats to tack up before we applied the second one, we built some lap straight clamps. Now, these are specific to this boat. I've designed these clamps especially for this boat, and this allows us to pinch together the parts of the planks where they overlap down the side of the boat. We needed 2 different size lap straight clamps for this boat so that we were able to glue up both planks in the same day. Again, this was a time-saving feature, but this was a good little process to teach the students a little assembly process, use some really quick setting glues. But these clamps also have another feature that they use up all of the scrap parts of the plywood around the sheets that the parts of the boat are cut from, so it's a very efficient use of material as well, and it's a great little exercise for building some tools out of very simple plywood parts. On day 3 we can start the assembly of our little boat. So we pre-sand all of the parts that we epoxy coated the day before to get the surfaces nice and flat and prepared for finishing later on down the line. Then we can get everything assembled. So we built the strongback for the boat, and this locates all of our framing and our stem within the assembly. There's a laser line reference point set throughout the parts of the strongback, which allows us to make sure that there's no twist and to make sure that it's set up nice and level. Then all of the frame parts locate and position really positively. The bottom planking can then be positioned, and this actually does a huge amount for location and alignment of parts as well as the strongback, almost as much, because the bottom planking is notched for each frame and also for the stem, and it's got a rebate that runs along it for the chine landings as well. This helps you to center all the frames and make sure that the boat is nice and straight and true and even either side. So this all really helps to lock things in and make sure that everything is in exactly the correct position. This all gets fitted as a dry fit initially and screwed together just to make sure that everything fits perfectly. We're then going to back all of those out, and we will do a fully glued assembly on the following day once we've pre-fitted all of the planking and we're happy that everything is locating as it should do. Next up, we could do the same dry fit of all the side planking. Now, I've introduced a little bit of hand tool work here just so that this wasn't entirely assembly procedures from pre-CNC cut things. So we learned how to cut the bevels on the forward end of the planks to land them correctly into our stem using a small block plane, and just by marking this from the markings for the rabbet line on the stem that is already in place. We also do a little bit of trimming of the planks just to make sure that they fit perfectly and they land into that rebate that creates the chine joint within the bottom planking. Again, these get screwed into place and those screws will get backed out later on when we do a full glue up. We do plenty of checks just to make sure that we're happy with the fitment of everything and that the curves of the chine in particular are looking nice and fair. Then we do a full install of all the planks. So we just check that the geralds are fitting properly and landing, that the bevels up at the stem end of the boat are nice fitting as well, and that everything is going together well. We pre-screw everything in place, ready to glue up tomorrow. And you can see the use of our clamps here just as an early tool to help us get things pinned together and held in place. Once we're happy, we can mask up all of the plank landings so that we've got an indication of where to glue to when we remove the planks the following day, and that's also going to help us to get a really neat glue line when it comes to the epoxy work. Day 4 is the big glue up day. We basically take everything back apart and then we can glue all of these joints together. So that's all of the pockets that land the bottom planking and locate that into all the framing and the stem. And then we can glue up all 6 of the side planks, and we do all of this in one single day. This is a really good utilization of all of our lap straight clamps to hold those plank landings together and to make sure that we can get the whole boat assembled all in one hit. Towards the end of the day, when we can't really do any more on the boat, this is a really good opportunity to start laminating some of our knees. Because the bend of some of these laminations is really quite severe, we'd previously steam bent some of these timber sections just to help them to go around the curve a little bit better. And this was a good extra little thing to be able to show the students a little bit of steam bending. So we set up one of the Academy's steam boxes and pre-bent some laminations. We actually did this a couple of days previously and allowed the laminations to cool down and dry out before we then epoxied them together. So we apply a lightly thickened epoxy to either face of the lamination and build up some stacks to form a pair of quarter knees, a breast hook and a transom knee that we'll install in the boat a little bit further on down the line. And we did this from alternating timber types using sapele and cedar, both in different layers, to give a nice striped finish to the boat and just show how we can utilize lamination to make really nice looking little timbers. We also had a little go at doing this with some layers of carbon fiber in between cedar, just to show as an alternative option how we could create incredibly lightweight and really strong knees as another alternative option. On day 5, we can start out by cleaning up the knees that we laminated the day before, and then you can get a really clear visual indication of what's going on with that lamination, and they look really smart, I think you'll agree. The boat is now fully glued up, so we can turn it over. We flip the boat over and we can do a little bit of cleanup on the inside. There's not a huge amount of cleanup to do because we've pre-coated all of the internal faces of all the parts, so they're already really clean. We just get to trim in some of the plank ends and things that are overhanging slightly, which also includes the chine line. There's a purposeful overhang on that which allows us to trim back to a nice neat edge on the chine. Then we can begin the filleting process. So in order to increase the strength within this boat and increase the glue surface area where the edges of 12mm plywood frames bond into the planking, we fillet pretty much every internal corner within this boat. We create a large fillet along the chine line as well, and we do this on every frame landing. So this was a really good exercise for the full team to get on and experience doing some epoxy fillets using the West System 105-205 epoxy thickened with the 407 low density filler. And that ties things up for the end of our first week. In the first 5 days, we have a complete hull built and filleted inside, pre-coated on the inside. So we're ready to start the finishing process at the beginning of our second week. Day 6 takes us into the start of the second week, and this was a really busy day. We had lots of stuff to get done on the boat. If we wanted to launch the boat by the end of the second week, there was a lot to crack on with. So We divided and conquered somewhat and got loads done. It was a really productive day. We were able to turn the boat over again. We've got some gunnels to install. So these are comprising of a timber on the inside and the outside of the ply along the shear line of the boat. And they've also got a little timber capping that goes in the middle of these two timbers and just closes off the edge grain plywood that would otherwise be sticking up along here, which you don't want on display. So we installed those and got those bonded in place. As soon as they were bonded, because they're screwed as well, we could then flip the boat back over and start some work on the keel. So there is a keel timber that runs along the bottom of the boat here just to give some grounding for if you're beaching this boat or putting it on a trailer, something like that. So this goes in place, and then there's a little skeg that goes in position afterwards. First of all, this all got dry fitted just to make sure that it was locating properly. We could trim it down to size, and then it came back off so that we could bond it in place. We were also going to glass the chines on the boat, so we could flush off the chines, get them slightly rounded, and then apply some glass tape over these just for a little bit of additional reinforcement and some abrasion resistance along that chine where you don't really want to create any damage and let water ingress happen. So we glassed the chines and then we bonded the keel straight on top of that immediately afterwards. Whilst all of that was going on, some other students in the group were working on some of the internal components for the boat. So we've got some riser timbers that run along all of the framing, and these support the underside of the thwarts and the aft seat that will fit into the boat in the end. So they could be fit in place. These were one of the timbers that we previously cut some scarf joints on earlier on in the course. So these could be dry fit, just again so that we've got a locating screw hole so that these can go back in right before final launch day, but also come back out for pre-finishing ahead of time. The thwarts were also cut to size and notched to fit over the framing and then marked so that they could screw into the risers. The aft seat was also built with slats that run forward and aft, and it's got a middle section of this aft seat that lifts out to create a little locker in the rear section of the boat here. This would be a great little place to store a battery if you were going to power the boat with an electric outboard motor. On day 7, we were getting a little bit close for timing to actually get our boat launched on day 10. Of course, remember that on day 10 we have got no time for doing anything like paint, so this actually left us 3 days to get our paint and varnish system done on the boat. Just as well we're using 2-part systems. So we started out day 7 doing a handful of the small timber jobs that still needed doing on the boat. We glued a little capping onto the bow, and we used the West System G5 5-minute epoxy to get us out of a bit of a hole here. This is really good for stuff that you need to just get done very quickly, because within 5 minutes the epoxy's set and you can move on. So we were able to use that to get this last little job done before paint. Then we could get the inside of the boat prepped for paint, so we could sand everything down, just neaten up those fillets a little bit wherever needed, and do a vacuum and a degrease. We also did the same for the outside. I didn't show this on video, but with the chines that we glassed, I later coated those with West System 105-205 thickened with the 407 low density fairing compound. This was done on the same day as glassing, which meant that the following day we could sand the chines nice and smooth and get them ready for paint. So then we're on to paint, and we are using the Epiphanes epoxy primer on this. So we did 1 coat of epoxy primer on the inside of the boat. Of course, this is already sealed and pre-coated with the West System epoxy, so there's no wood grain to fill here. It's a really good surface to work from. So we did 1 coat on the inside of the boat, then we turned the boat over, and then we did several coats on the outside of the boat. Of course, we've got wood grain to fill here, so it took a little bit more, and I did do a little bit of a late night staying on to put multiple coats of epoxy on the boat so that we were ready to carry on the next day. So we did 3 coats of epoxy on the outside of the hull to get us plenty of material on there, ready to sand it for the following day, and then get started on our top coat. Remember, 3 days is a very short window to get a full paint system done on the inside and outside of even a small boat. So on day 8, we got our primer sanded back. We had to go a little bit light here. We didn't want to burn through the primer too heavily in any places, but actually because we've got a really good fair hull, we're starting with a plywood hull, we didn't have to do a huge amount of sanding. So we got our primer blocked back on the outside of the boat and on the inside of the boat as well. Then we were able to vacuum all that off, degrease, and then go straight on with our first top coat. So we opted for a cream coloured polyurethane top coat on the inside of the boat. That's going to give us a nice high gloss, a really hard wearing finish for when you're climbing in and out of the boat. And it's actually going to look really nice against the chestnut, which is the wood that we're using that is light coloured on the inside of this boat. In case you were wondering what species that is, it's English chestnut. So because of the configuration of this boat with the wooden gunnels in place as they are, this actually enabled us to be able to paint the inside and the outside of the boat both in the same day. As long as we paint the inside first, we can then rotate the boat immediately and paint the outside. Again, this was one of the things I had to factor into the course. Simply to be able to get this done in time, we have to be able to paint the inside and the outside of the boat on the same day. So we flip that over, and then we start to paint the outside. We're using the same paint here. We're using the Epiphanes polyurethane top coat, which again is going to give us quick drying times and a really hard wearing paint. Bear in mind we need to paint this and then put it on the water the following day. So I did a handful of demonstrations with the students on application of the polyurethane top coat, primarily using a roller, but also using a brush a little bit as well for this first coat. We could also start the varnishing process. So again, this is something that we're going to have to do very quickly in order to get things done within our time scale. So we've got the thwarts and the aft seat to varnish on this boat. Everything else is going to be an oiled finish. So we're using the Epiphanes PP here, which is a really great product for building varnish incredibly quickly. So we started out doing our build-up coats with the Epiphanes PP, and that allowed us to do around 4 to 5 coats in one day to get us a nice good base built on there. And then on the following day, we'll do the final top coat. We then finished up with starting to get our knees ready to install in the boat on the final day. Now, I've done these so that these knees are removable, so that can really help us with the finishing process. It allows us to be able to finish a paint system and an oiled or varnished system within the same boat on the same day. So making these modular and taking them apart allowed me to be able to do that. So in order to make that work nicely, we installed these little brass press fit screw cups. This allows us to apply a finish to things such as the knees and the thwarts, and then screw them in place after they've been finished without then damaging that varnish finish or oiled finish in the case of the knees. So showed the students a method to install these press fit brass screw cups and make a really neat job of installing these on the final day. Day 9 takes us into our final day where we can do any kind of finishing or gluing on the boat, because we got to put this on the water on day 10. So we blocked back our first top coat, tried to get this a little bit flat, about as good as we could with the amount of product that was on there, and then we were able to sand that off and degrease it and then apply our second top coat. We decided to leave the inside with just one top coat on it because it was actually covering very nicely and looking really good, and it was going to make sure that this paint was nice and hard for us to walk on the launch day. So we did a second top coat on the outside of the boat. This time I showed the students a slight variation to the application method, and we decided to roll the paint on and then tip it off so they can see how this varies in comparison to just the pure roller application method that I very often use. We also did the final varnish on the thwarts, so we sanded back the build-up coats of PP that we'd applied on the day before, and then we applied one coat of traditional gloss varnish to show them the application techniques for slightly smoother flowing and a higher gloss finish of the traditional varnish. Of course, in any normal time you would actually do at least 3 coats of this top coat varnish, but this illustrated the process well enough and allowed us to be able to launch on the final day. We then applied some oil to all the oiled components that were going to be on the boat, so all of our knees that we're going to screw in on the final day. So for this we're using the Dex Oil D1, which is a really thin penetrating oil, and this is really nice for a kind of soft finish on things like this, any timber that's doing a little bit of work, and also something that you want to get finished very quickly, certainly if you've got multiple sides to worry about. So all the timbers that we're going to screw in on the last day, aside from the varnish stuff, we've finished with D1. So that takes us to the final day and launch day. There were a handful of jobs to do on the final day just to get the boat put together. This mostly involved just screwing the knees and the thwarts and all the internal components into the boat. So I showed the students a handful of methods for installing hardware on boats, and yes, we did make sure that we clocked up all the screw heads, because I'm sorry, that absolutely has to be done if it's one of my jobs. Now, one of the things you will notice is that there are no rowlocks on the boat. This is the only thing that we ran out of time to install. We didn't get time to make the spreaders and the mounting blocks and get those bonded in to fit those in with our painting schedule. So unfortunately, we couldn't install those, and that meant that on launch day, we had to do it canoe paddle style instead of traditionally rowed. But I think given the time frame, just to drop one little thing like that wasn't too bad really, and next year I'm sure we'll try and get those included. So then it was out of the academy, across down to the beach, and we were ready to launch our little boat and see our hard work of the last 2 weeks come together on the sea. Of course, we had to have a bottle of champagne to celebrate the moment as well. Quite cool to actually be putting the boat on the water after having just started it 10 days previously. Now we've got this course ready to run again next year. We're going to expand it slightly, so we're probably going to build 2 boats next year, and we're going to offer more places, but there are only going to be 10 spots available. So if you'd be interested in coming down to Lyme Regis and the Boatbuilding Academy and spending 10 days with me building a couple of these little skiffs next year, then it'd be really great to have you there. Please make sure to get yourself booked on the course nice and early so that you definitely get a space, because there are limited spaces available and we can only run this course once a year. So take a look in the description below this video and you can see the link to where you can book on to next year's boat building course and join me as we do this again next year. I have now also released the plans for this boat, so if you aren't able to come on the course but you'd still like to build yourself one of these, you can buy the plans via digital download, and the link for that is in the description below this video as well. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed following our little skiff build on year 1 of the boat building course, and I hope to see you joining me along with the course when we run it again next year.